Welcome back, everyone, to the late night review. And tonight I want to talk about a movie that I grew up watching, a movie that's always been a favorite of mine, and it's A Force of One with Chuck Norris. And I grew up watching Chuck Norris movies, Bruce Lee movies. Um, I've always been a fan of martial arts movies and action, shoot 'em up movies too. This movie I have a lot of nostalgia for. It's always been one of my very favorite Chuck Norris movies. You have Bill Wallace in here, one of the greatest martial artists of all time, kickboxing champion, one of the greatest kickboxing champions of all time. I mean, right up there with all the greats of Don the Dragon Wilson, Benny the Jet Urquidez, and just some of the best excuse me, athletes of all time. Not just kickboxers, but just all around athletes and very, very great fighters. Bill Wallace was, some people consider Bill Wallace to be the greatest kickboxer of all time. Some say it's Don the Dragon Wilson, Benny Urquidez. It goes back and forth. To me, they're all great. I grew up watching them. I grew up watching PKA. I grew up watching boxing, professional wrestling. I used to eat, drink, and sleep wrestling and boxing and kickboxing. If you've seen my other videos, you know I come from a fighting family. I'm not a pro fighter myself, but been training for many, many years. Into it very, very deeply in terms of since I was a kid, watching these boxing matches and kickboxing matches and professional wrestling and Greco-Roman too, college wrestling also, or when the Olympics, they used to have that more than they do now. When I was a kid, they used to focus on the boxing, the weightlifting, the wrestling more when I was younger. Now they don't, and so I kind of stopped watching the Olympics because in the commercials too, I don't really watch the Olympics anymore except for the opening ceremonies and maybe closing ceremonies. Depends on my mood, who knows? But when I was younger, they focused a lot more on boxing and wrestling and weightlifting. But yeah, I kind of went in a loop there. But I grew up watching PKA. I saw Don the Dragon Wilson, Benny Urquidez, and Bill Wallace, and they used to rerun their fights on TV all the time, and I'd try to record them. It brings back a lot of memories for me, a lot of nostalgia. A Force of One is very nostalgic for me. Not only is it a good movie, a nostalgia beside, not only is it a good movie, but it features Chuck Norris and Bill Wallace. And there's other actors in here that you've seen in other movies. Clu Gallagher's in here. And it's a good story too. The story is that the police are after drug dealers and a organized crime syndicate. And there's a karate killer in the city. There's a karate killer who's killing police officers and anyone who gets close to solving the case. Anyone who gets close to discovering who's dealing the drugs gets killed, and they get stomped to death. They get killed, get their necks broke, beaten to death by a karate killer. Just a fascinating story. It's good acting for a martial arts movie. It's a good acting. And when I say that, there's a lot of B-rated movies, a lot of martial arts movies with poor acting. There's something wrong with them, but they could be fun. They could be absolute dynamite in terms of fun. Some of the acting isn't that good often, but in this movie, the acting's actually pretty good. I like the acting, and Clu Gallagher, he's a veteran actor, always gives a solid performance. He plays the police chief, I believe. I know he's in charge of the investigation. He's a police chief. There's other actors in here that I recognize from other movies. The plot is good. It's exciting. The movie's got a fast pace. Chuck Norris eventually gets asked by Clu Gallagher, who plays the police chief, the head of the investigation, to train his police force so they don't keep getting killed. There's a karate killer out there, and he kills these police officers when they get too close to solving the crime, solving the case. So they're supposed to go to karate class. And Clu Gallagher asks Chuck Norris' character. Matt Logan is the character that Chuck Norris plays, and in here he's a kickboxing champion, and he's going to defend his title eventually against Bill Wallace. And Bill Wallace is one of the main characters in here, and he's climbing the ladder to get to the championship. And they don't focus on him climbing the ladder so much in this movie, but they show a couple of his fights, one or two of his fights. They show him working out and training, and they show Chuck Norris training in here. There's no big training montages in here, but you see him exercising, working out from time to time. Chuck Norris trains the police force. There's probably a lot of people, especially younger generations, who haven't seen this, so I won't spoil the ending for you in this review. I'm not going to give everything away. You can probably guess maybe what might happen, but I'm not going to give everything away. In this particular review, most people have seen this movie, but there's probably younger generations who haven't, so I won't give the ending away, even though, you know, it might not be hard to guess once you start watching it. And I think when you start watching this movie, they actually don't hold anything back, really. It's pretty easy to guess once you start getting into the movie who is doing what and what's going on behind the scenes. Very easy to guess this movie, so it's not a mystery, really, but it's a fun story. It's a fun premise. I've always enjoyed this movie. Chuck Norris, I've had other videos on the channel, on my YouTube channel, talking about his movies and what an inspiration he's been for me and a lot of people to exercise and to be fit. And I hope that a lot of people watch this and like and subscribe, and I hope a lot of people watch his movie reviews that I've done, reviews for his movies on my channel, because Chuck Norris is one of the legends. I mean, he helped pave the way along with Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee was the first pretty much to just explode onto the scene with these martial arts movies and just absolutely pave the way for others to follow. And Chuck Norris and him were in Return of the Dragon, also called Way of the Dragon. It had two different titles over the years. Way of the Dragon first, and then after Bruce Lee died, then it became Return of the Dragon because it was re-released, I believe, later. So Bruce Lee, another movie with Bruce Lee, and you know, it was made before he died, obviously, but they re-released it, I think, in different markets. It was called Return of the Dragon, and that was such a classic. It was one of my all-time favorite martial arts movies. Return of the Dragon, also called Way of the Dragon, with Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris. I grew up watching that movie, and I tell you, Bruce Lee paved the way, and then Chuck Norris kind of carried the torch after his death. Those two guys, just similar in age and everything, and they really helped pioneer the martial arts movies, and kung fu movies and martial arts movies were around for a long, long time, and they were definitely they had a following, but they didn't explode in the popularity, and they didn't become so mainstream until Bruce Lee came on the scene. And then, of course, later Chuck Norris, and then Jean-Claude Van Damme and others, made them bigger and bigger and bigger. But yeah, Bruce Lee is really a pioneer, and Chuck Norris is another pioneer of this whole genre. So I hope a lot of people watch this. Chuck Norris deserves it. He's a legend. He's one of the greatest martial artists of all time. And he's another person who brought martial arts into the mainstream on film. Bruce Lee first, and then Chuck Norris did it later. And then later Jean-Claude Van Damme and others. And just this movie, A Force of One, I like a lot. I wouldn't rank it as high as Way of the Dragon or Return of the Dragon. But this movie is really enjoyable. I like it quite a bit. Chuck Norris, Bill Superfoot Wallace. You can go on YouTube and watch Bill Superfoot Wallace fights, interviews, training videos, all kinds of stuff. Just a phenomenal guy and very inspirational. When I see these guys, I always want to exercise again. Even if I've finished an exercise, I want to do something when I see their films. But this movie it's pretty, if you want to relax and watch a movie, it's also good for that too. But the pace is pretty good. It's not really slow at all. It's a pretty good pace. Most of Chuck Norris movies are good paced movies. I like this one. I like Breaker Breaker. Maybe I'll do a review of that in the future. Breaker Breaker it came out the same year I was born, but I watched reruns of that, and I watched the video cassette when we went to the video store. It would be rented for me, and I'd watch it over and over again. Maybe I'll do a review of that in the future. But this one here is one of my favorite Chuck Norris movies. That's why I decided to put this one on the channel before a few of the others, because I think it's in my top 4 or 5 Chuck Norris movies. Like I said before, when I did the review for Forced Vengeance, and I also did a review for An Eye for an Eye, I think those are my 2 favorite Chuck Norris movies. But I tell you, A Force of One and The Octagon and Breaker Breaker are pretty close. And then I also like Hero and the Terror too. Those are pretty close to the top as well. Maybe one day I'll do a review and rank all the Chuck Norris movies in this late night review show that I have. I might review all the Chuck Norris movies and rank them all in one episode. I'm not sure, maybe in the future. But yeah, A Force of One, if you haven't seen it, it brings back a lot of memories for me. Like I said, the PKA and the kickboxing, watching all that when I was a kid. This movie's about kickboxing in a way, but it's also about the murder investigation, the drug dealing, and the police trying to solve who's dealing the drugs. People are being killed. There's a karate killer who's killing police officers who get close to solving it, and he's working for the criminal group. So it's an interesting story. Chuck Norris is in here, and then eventually, just one thing, I won't give away everything, but just one thing, it makes the plot more interesting. Chuck Norris does try to avenge his adopted son, who eventually gets killed by the karate killer, and that's really an interesting aspect to this, and it gives him all the more motivation to fight and to seek justice. So that makes the movie more interesting. And check it out. This is a classic to me. A Force of one of Chuck Norris's earliest films. A lot of nostalgia for it. So if you haven't seen it, check it out. This has been the Late Night Review. Please like and subscribe. And until next time, good night, everybody.